Hope you all are having a great weekend. Welcome to another episode of Murder, Mysteries, and More. My name is Kaylee.
And my name is Desi.
Today we'll be diving into one of Hawaii's coldest cases, the murder of Lisa Au. Before we get into this case, we always encourage those who have useful information to any unsolved case, please report it to your local police and sheriff department.
Lisa Au was born on July 25, 1962 in Honolulu, Hawaii. Her parents are Chester and Patrice. Her mother was Hawaiian and her father was Chinese. She had a little sister named Maylee and a little brother named Chester Jr. Chester Jr.'s nickname was Denny. Her mom was a waitress and her father was an automotive mechanic. She was raised in Kailua, which was located on the windward side of Oahu.
A little background information about the windward side of Oahu is that the region is on the eastern side of the island. This is important to note because of its location. It is windy and wetter than Honolulu. Honolulu is located on the opposite side of the mountain, separating the two coastlines. Lisa was your typical Hawaiian girl. She had beautiful black wavy hair and was very involved with her community.
Everyone that knew Lisa absolutely adored her. In 1980, Lisa graduated high school from Mary Knowles School. Maylee looked up to her big sister. One of Maylee's favorite memories was from a California trip. The Owls went to Six Flags and Knott's Berry Farms. Maylee saw Star Wars with her big sister Lisa. That was their first time at the movie theater.
At 19 years old, Lisa just finished beauty school. She got hired at Susan Beer Salon in Kailua. After working there for about a month, Lisa decided to get an apartment. Her roommate was Candy Mays. Lisa's 23-year-old boyfriend, Doug Holmes, helped her move.
Doug was attending the University of Hawaii for a degree in engineering. Lisa and her boyfriend met at a restaurant in Kailua. Doug lived in the dorm 30 minutes away from Lisa, and his sister, Kristin, lived near him, Makiki. January 21st of 1982, Lisa went to work and had plans to go out with a dinner with Doug and Kristin. However, her mom did not think it was a great idea because of the rain, and she just got her license 2 days prior.
She also just got her car, a brown 76 Toyota. Lisa didn't mind the rain and wanted to go out. 9:45 p.m., Lisa drove through the pouring rain to get to her boyfriend's sister's apartment. On the way to Makiki, she stopped at a grocery store in Hawaii. It's a tradition to bring a small gift if you're going to someone's house. To get to Kristin's house on Mont Smith, she took the scenic Pali Highway.
It connects Honolulu to the windward side of the island. Scenic Pali Highway is very dangerous. Even more dangerous where rain is involved. Lisa made it safely to Kristin's apartment. The three of them enjoyed homemade enchiladas and poke. Kristin had asked Lisa if she would like to stay the night because of the weather. Lisa declined. Doug went to his dorm and Lisa would be driving back home.
Before Lisa left, she called her roommate Candy to let her know she was on her way. Lisa did not make it back to Kailua. Candy immediately called Lisa's parents, concerned that she was at home. Lisa's mother was very concerned. Her parents knew she went to Kristin, so they gave Doug a call. Doug said he didn't know where she was. He was worried that she got into a wreck because of the weather.
Doug headed out to Kailua to find Lisa. Not long after, he found her car 2 miles away from her apartment. It was off the Pali Highway next to the old drive-in movie theater. Lisa was not in the car, so Doug called the authorities. It was clear someone broke into the car. The front seat was soaked and the battery was drained. What's odd is that everything was soaked except for her purse.
Lisa's license and her car registration papers were missing. The officer noticed that Doug had some scratches on his face and thought if Lisa truly walked out of her car, she would have her purse. The officers went to test the car for fingerprints, but it had been completely wiped clean. Authorities reported her as missing, and many would search for her, hoping she was still alive.
On January 31st, a man walking his dog on Tantalus Drive in Honolulu smelled a strong odor. He followed the scent to an embankment 25 feet from the ravine. There laid Lisa's body. He went straight to his house and called authorities. Officers went to the scene and confirmed it was Lisa. It was her parents' worst nightmare. Their daughter had been murdered.
When her parents broke the news to her little sister Maylee, she was heartbroken. The body was found 3 miles from Kristin's apartment, which was 10 miles from where her car was found. The Honolulu News raised money for Lisa's case and offered cash for those with any useful information. Charles Odom ruled her death as homicide, unfortunately because her body was decomposed.
Since her body was found naked, Charles knew that it was not a suicide and that it could possibly be sexual assault. Police had multiple suspects but did not really act on it. The theory police had was either she was killed by an officer or somebody impersonating an officer. They believed this was because both her license and her car registration were missing.
Some witnesses reported that a car with blue lights had pulled her over that night. Thomas Byrne, a Honolulu police officer, was the first suspect. It was known that Byrne had sexually assaulted a 14-year-old girl for a police ride-along. He didn't get much of a sentence. He only had 120 hours of community service, paid a $250 fine, and 1 year of counseling. He was only let go from the department for 5 days, then let back on the police force.
Byrne had admitted to pulling over a woman that night. He lived a block away from the Owls and went to a party on the windward side of the island. He was kicked off the force and cadaver dogs were sent to sniff all the police cars, and the dogs barked at his car.
Police also tried to get answers from another officer to see if he could help solve the case. Michael Rayfelt was directing traffic the night of her disappearance. He didn't remember seeing Byrne pull over Lisa. When the news was published, Burns was a prime suspect and everyone started panicking.
As of 2022, police officers who have been on the force for 8 years in Honolulu can drive unmarked police cars. In the 80s, in Oahu, police just had to attach blue girl lights to their cars while on duty and take them off when they were off duty. It was a lot easier for someone to impersonate a cop back then.
Police also were a little wary of Doug. They required him to take 2 polygraph tests, and he failed both tests. It's also important to note that the polygraph technology between the 80s and now has not really changed. Doug was asked in an interview how he felt about the test. He states that he feels guilty because he wasn't experienced enough to drive her home safely.
Police did not find any motives for Doug to kill her. They then decided he was not guilty. Doug did mention he was wanting to end his relationship with her because they were going on 2 different paths. August of 1982, there was a grand jury for the police's possible suspects. Lieutenant Burt Cornell thought that the police department did a horrible job on Lisa's case. He wanted justice for her.
Cornell looked at the case again and saw several mistakes that the police had made. The police had failed to ask some other witnesses and potential leads. Months after the investigation, Cornell went to MJ's grocery, and this is where Lisa stopped before she went to Kristin's apartment and bought the poke. He found out from a cashier that she left her license at the store. Cornell also found another witness.
The other witness was a newspaper delivery driver. Her name was Charlotte Kamaka. Burt interviewed her on August 6th of 1983. She says that night she saw something suspicious on Tantalus Drive. She saw a blue car, white male, with a female in the passenger seat. When the car turned, according to Charlotte, the woman's head fell.
When the car came back around, the woman was no longer in the car. The man stopped the car and stared at Charlotte. When Lisa's body was found, Charlotte went to the police. They told her that they would be in contact. However, no one contacted her. She tried calling them, but they would not give her details.
Burt had a photo lineup of potential suspects. He thought maybe Charlotte could help identify the driver. To his surprise, she picked out suspect 2, which was Doug Holmes, Lisa's boyfriend. Doug also drove a car that matched Charlotte's description of the vehicle she saw. Burt also got in contact with the security guard located at Lisa's apartment.
The security guard states that he saw Lisa and Doug fighting. During the trial against Doug, other officers disregarded Charlotte's testimonies. They said she changed her story many times. It was rumored that Michael Rayfelt, who did not remember seeing Lisa's car that night, was told to lie during trial. Michael refused to lie.
About a year after her death, tissue samples were sent to toxicology labs. They found a little bit of cocaine in her system. The Owls were given $4,000 for her burial, and this meant that they had to receive smaller welfare checks because it counted as additional income. 3 years after trying to solve the case, police didn't have enough evidence to prove that an off-duty officer murdered her.
Byrne tried to sue the Honolulu PD because of the distress of being labeled as a suspect despite the lack of evidence. Unfortunately, we will never know the exact cause of her death because the coroner waited too long to send her tissue samples in. We hope one day the Owls get the justice they deserve for their daughter. Here are some questions.
Lisa had to take one of Hawaii's most dangerous highways to get home from Kristin's, Doug's sister's apartment. Why was her boyfriend comfortable with her driving in such bad conditions, especially late at night? I'm not for sure why he would be so comfortable with that, because if it was my loved one going out there driving on a dangerous highway, especially in the rain, I would be very concerned that they would maybe get into an accident or that they would have car troubles and have to pull over. Maybe the thought just didn't occur to him that she was going down such a dangerous highway in the middle of rain.
I don't know why her boyfriend was comfortable with it. Maybe he just didn't really think too much about it, and he maybe thought that Lisa had some other stuff to do the next day and thought nothing much of it. But I do still find it really odd that it was like storming really bad that night. She barely even made it to Kristin's apartment, and he was fine with her going home even after his sister offered if she wanted to stay the night she could. Lisa's parents called Doug when Lisa was missing, since he was the last one who saw her. He went to look for her and located her car very quickly. How was he able to locate her car that quick? I do find it a little suspicious that it didn't even take him. It only took him like a few minutes for him to be able to find her car. One of the main reasons why he might have been able to is she also didn't break down too far from her apartment. It was only 2 miles, so he didn't really have to drive that far anyways to find her car. I do find it a little bit suspicious that he was able to locate it so quickly.
Maybe he just got lucky and stumbled upon it, but also maybe he secretly knew where her car was.
He could have also put her car there.
Why was Lisa's license and registration missing from her car when the police found her car? And why was her purse dry when the car was soaked? It's also good to notate that she left her license at the grocery store. A reason why her registration could have been missing was maybe somebody didn't want to, the police to find her car or to know that the car was hers, because obviously at this point they murdered her and they were trying to hide her body. They were trying to keep everyone from finding her. A reason why her purse may have been dry when the car was soaked. That's a little strange, to be honest, but maybe, just maybe, her purse was in a different location. Maybe not with her. Maybe it was with her. Her purse just ended up being dry for some strange reason.
Yeah, it definitely is a little bit weird that her registration was missing. Obviously, she left her license at the store, so that part makes sense. But if someone did murder her, maybe they wanted to play it off as the police force being involved in her murder, and that's how they're able to get away with it. So they thought if they took away the registration, then they would think, oh, an unmarked police car went to pull her over, and obviously they asked for your license and registration. They wanted the police to be kind of more focused on that. And then with her purse being dry, I think that it is possible that her purse was placed after the fact that she was murdered. Obviously, what could have happened is maybe her car broke down before and then somebody found her and they went to murder her and they took her away and she brought her purse. So obviously her purse would have been dry by then, and that's why her body was found separate from her car, and that's why her purse was dry, because she brought it with her and then they decided to place it in there. When the police went to get fingerprints from the car was wiped completely free of fingerprints. So clearly whoever murdered her knew what they were doing. They potentially could have murdered other people as well, or they were really determined to murder her. Doug failed a polygraph test twice. He seems a little bit suspicious. He also states that he was breaking up with her that night, did her boyfriend snap and murder her. It is important to note that later on, her boyfriend Doug talks about him wanting to break up with her. So what if it was the other way around? Her apartment security guard said that they saw both Doug and Lisa fighting, having an argument. So Lisa, maybe she decided that she was done with her boyfriend and she was doing well. He wasn't any good for her, so she wanted to pretty much break things off that night, and maybe that's why she was so determined to drive over there and eat dinner to kind of say goodbye and end in a decent note. Maybe instead of Doug actually going back to his place, he actually followed her back to her apartment. She broke up with him and he snapped and basically murdered her.
But I definitely feel like when some people are in a relationship and one breaks up with the other, sometimes they say that they're the one who's going to break up with them instead of the truth being that the other person is breaking up with them. Just to maybe make themselves look a little better or feel a little better. He definitely could have snapped and killed her after.
Charlotte, the newspaper delivery driver, she says that he is the exact man that she saw driving the same blue car that Doug drives with an unconscious woman, and then he leaves and comes back and that unconscious woman is gone.
Did an unmarked cop car actually pull Lisa over that night? The Honolulu PD are set on this theory despite other leads. The officer on duty for Scenic Poly Highway mentions he never saw police pulling over Lisa. I feel like it truly was an unmarked cop car. It was maybe one that the Honolulu PD did not have a record, or it could have been somebody impersonating an unmarked cop car just to pull Lisa over in order to do whatever to her. Person could have very easily done this to multiple other women, especially being on Scenic Poly Highway, it being such a dangerous highway. A lot of women go missing, a lot of things happen on that highway, so anything is possible. Unfortunately, back in the 80s, it was a lot easier to impersonate an unmarked cop car than it is now in 2022.
Yeah, and even in today's age, there's still a handful of cases that you can actually find of actual people posing as an officer using unmarked police car, but they're not even an actual officer, murdering and raping women. Like, there is still a lot of cases in today's society that does involve that, unfortunately. But like you said, definitely in the 80s it was a lot easier because with the cars back then, something to note, the only requirements is while they were on duty, they just had to have blue lights on their grill. Anybody could easily install blue lights on the grill, and also sometimes, I know especially back then, a lot of cops, when they were done with their cars, they would go and sell them, and so easily someone could have bought an old police car or whatever. Pretty much anybody could take any car and put those blue lights on the car. Hawaii is a little bit different compared to the rest of the United States, because even in today's age, if you've been an officer on duty for 8 years, you are allowed to drive a regular civilian car because it saves a lot of money for the police department in Hawaii. Why did the coroner wait months to send her tissue samples in for a toxicology report? So it is very frustrating that they waited over a year to even send in her samples, and her body was already started decomposing whenever they found her body, which is like insane. I think that it is kind of ridiculous that they waited so long, and I think the main reason why they just waited so long is that this case was just poorly done to begin with, and maybe that they thought they wouldn't be able to find any other evidence, and they were pretty much set on it being a homicide. which is pretty clear that it was murdered. She was murdered, but they might have thought that, you know, why would it matter if we found drugs in her system or anything? It would be important to know because if they would have done that, you know, they could find things like date rape, drugs.
Back in the 80s, we didn't know too much about like tissue samples and DNA like we do nowadays. The coroner may have had the thought that the tissue samples will be okay if we send them in at a later date, and kept pushing it off until it was unfortunately too late and the tissue samples were no longer good. Like you said, this case was very poorly handled, but also the technology that we had back then wasn't their greatest and wasn't as advanced as we have nowadays. What we knew then is not what we know now, unfortunately. And that leads into our next question. A small amount of cocaine was found in Lisa's system. Her friends claimed she never did hard drugs before. Why was there cocaine in her system? A small amount of cocaine could have possibly came from a type of date rape drug. She could have had cocaine put in her drink, in her food. Or there's even the possibility that even though her friends claim she never did hard drugs, sometimes, unfortunately, you do not know that people are doing drugs behind your back. People hide it very well, especially addiction. But she could have very easily done cocaine with her boyfriend and her boyfriend's sister, and they could have left that detail out, of course.
So that could have been the first night that they did it anyways. But this definitely is very important to note because this kind of is questioning, is her friends really telling the truth? Because it's like, if you really know her, you're like, she didn't do drugs and all this and that. It just makes me wonder if they know something else. Because this kind of basically proves that they might not be telling the full truth. However, it is important, like you mentioned, that some people can still do drugs behind friends' back or whatever. And like this could have also very well been one of her first time doing cocaine because the tissue sample was sent such a long time after her body started decomposing. We don't know exactly how much cocaine was really in her system that night. Why did the police disregard Charlotte's testimonies? When Lieutenant Burt Cornell asked Charlotte what she witnessed, she claimed she saw Doug Holmes, Lisa's boyfriend, in a blue vehicle off the street of Tantalus Drive, and his sister basically lived near the street with an unconscious woman in the passenger seat. Police were supposed to call Charlotte but never did. The main reason why a lot of the police said that they disregarded Charlotte's testimonies is they said that her story changed every time. But I also want to mention as well, the police were pretty set on the beginning that somebody posing as an officer, or that ex-officer Burns, the one who assaulted the 14-year-old, they were pretty set on him kind of being the guilty one, even though that they didn't have like a whole lot of evidence. So I feel like they kind of threw these testimonies out because it would kind of prove against Burns being involved in her murder, and they pretty much were set on a police officer in an unmarked vehicle or a police officer impersonator murdering Lisa. Another thing as well is Charlotte was the only witness out there on that night. That's only one witness that they have. And so if there was another witness, then they probably would have believed more into Charlotte's theory. They didn't have like a license plate or anything. I feel like if they had a license plate, they probably would believe her story a little bit better.
Why were the police so focused on the theory that a police officer or a police officer impersonator murdered Lisa? They were so focused on the theory that it was a police officer was because her license and her registration was missing. She had to have been pulled over by some sort of unmarked car, and that's why they found her car where it was found. Maybe they were more focused on it because even though it would make their department look bad, maybe it would get rid of a couple of people that they didn't like so much. Quite a bit of evidence pointing towards the fact that it could have been a police officer or somebody who impersonated a police officer. So It seemed more likely than any other theory besides the boyfriend.
And I think another reason why they were pretty focused on that is maybe the whole situation with Burns, whenever that first came out that he was a potential suspect, all of like Honolulu and kind of like the surrounding cities and everything, they were really scared for their lives because they're like, oh, there is rogue police officers out there. I mean, of course the public would be freaked out. So maybe they thought, well, we should really focus on this theory and try getting rid of Burns so we look like a good guy. Also, this case just kept going and going. They just kind of wanted to just put a name on who murdered her, even if they really didn't, because it does take a lot of money and it takes a lot of time, as unfortunately like her car the fingerprints were wiped clean, so they couldn't get any fingerprints, and then her body was just so decomposed that it was really hard to find her exact cause of death, and they just weren't really getting much of anywhere. Part of it obviously was them not doing it the correct way, but part of it also was the lack of technology, and whoever murdered her did it a very clean way and hid a lot of their tracks. The fact, like you said, her license and car registration were missing, that just to them at the time made more sense than something else, because why else would those be missing? Who do we believe murdered Lisa and why? My first main theory that I really truly believe is that the boyfriend is involved, because first of all, her car and her body were found really far apart. Also, the fact that her body was only found 3 miles away from his sister's apartment. If Lisa's apartment security guard was really telling the truth, that they got in an argument, then that would prove that he could have snapped on her and killed her. Also, the fact as well, he failed 2 polygraph tests. Now, I know sometimes they're not 100% accurate because you can be nervous and stuff like that. You would think after failing the first one, you would want to try to pass the second one. Her license was found at the grocery store. He probably took her registration to make it look like the police did it because her license was already gone, but her license was at the grocery store. If Charlotte is telling the actual truth that she saw Doug Holmes on Tantalus Drive, which is really close to his sister's house, in that blue vehicle that he drove with an unconscious woman, and she did say she got a very clear picture of him. The thing as well is that he was generally pretty sympathetic. Other people noticed that a car pulled her over, or what appeared to be her car. Maybe he impersonated, but I feel like it would probably have been somebody else that impersonated her. And then also her body was found naked as well, so that could be sexual. So maybe a police officer impersonator posed as that, because this happens a lot, and they've been stalking her and they wanted to assault her, so they posed as an officer. And they're like, oh, I need your license and registration. She didn't have her license, so they're like, well, you need to get in the car. And she probably didn't think much of it, because if you don't have your license, then you should not be driving on the roads. She's like, okay, I guess we'll just go to the grocery store. And they pretty much just killed her that way.
It's a possibility. It could be the boyfriend. It could be somebody impersonating an officer. It could be a serial killer. It could have been a sex trafficker. It could have been anyone. But I definitely believe that boyfriend is hella suspicious, because you do not fail 2 polygraphs and get away with that shit. He's hiding something or lying about something. So whether he was directly involved in her murder, not for sure, but he had something to do with Lisa for sure and what happened to her. Thank you for listening to Murders, Mysteries, and More. Remember to always keep your eyes open. You never know when someone's watching.